The sun was setting over the crystal blue waters, casting a golden glow across the sleek yacht bobbing gently on the waves. On the deck, a group of wealthy guests gathered, sipping champagne and exchanging stories. Laughter filled the air as they pointed fingers at her. The quiet woman standing alone near the railing, dressed simply, looking out at the horizon, she didn't seem to belong. To them, she was just another guest who had somehow slipped through the cracks of their exclusive world, but they had no idea who she really was. As the evening wore on, the mocking whispers grew louder. They laughed at the way she fidgeted with her phone, her unpolished demeanor, her unfamiliarity with the opulence surrounding her. But when the captain approached, a calmness in his voice as he asked her to come below deck, that's when the laughter stopped. The others turned their heads in confusion as the woman gracefully walked past them and disappeared into the lower deck. They didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just another guest. The yacht they were all enjoying, it was hers, the very same yacht they thought she had no business on. How long would it take them to realize? But just when they were starting to piece things together, the story took another unexpected twist. Who is this mysterious woman? And why does she choose to keep her wealth hidden? More importantly, what happens when they discover the truth? Stay tuned, because things are about to get very interesting. The evening unfolded with an air of subtle tension as the other guests tried to shake off their curiosity about the woman. Conversations shifted, but every glance toward the lower deck seemed to linger a bit too long. No one dared to ask about her directly. Instead, they focused on the luxuries around them. The lavish dining spread, the glistening pool, and the boat's polished woodwork. Yet, something hung in the air, a feeling that all was not as it seemed. She had arrived earlier in the day, almost unnoticed. A quiet figure among the crowd of high-profile guests, she had slipped onto the yacht without making a scene. No one had paid much attention to her when she boarded, assuming she was just another guest invited by one of the more familiar faces. But now, as the hours passed and the laughter continued, her presence became an enigma. The captain's brief interaction with her was the first crack in the facade. The captain, a seasoned sailor with years of experience in handling the elite, had always been reserved and professional. But the way he had approached her, speaking to her with a respect that no one else seemed to receive, was enough to raise eyebrows. Meanwhile, the woman remained largely out of sight. She wasn't one for small talk, and when she did speak, it was always in a calm, measured tone. Not the kind of woman who would try to impress anyone with stories or name-dropping. But that made her even more intriguing. As the night wore on, the guests began to notice something else. The staff on board, who were usually so attentive, were acting differently around her. A few exchanged knowing glances as she moved between rooms, their respect for her almost palpable. It was becoming clear that they knew something no one else did. But what? And why was she keeping her true identity hidden? As the evening wore on, the laughter on deck began to shift from playful to uncertain. The guests who had been so eager to dismiss her were now exchanging glances, murmuring quietly about her strange behavior. No one could quite place their finger on it, but there was something about her that felt different, an unsettling air of mystery, like she was playing a game they didn't understand. A few of the more curious guests began to probe, asking the crew if they knew anything about her. But each inquiry was met with a polite but firm silence. The crew, typically chatty and accommodating, were almost unnervingly tight-lipped when it came to the woman. One of the guests, a wealthy entrepreneur named Marcus, decided he'd had enough. His ego wouldn't let him walk away from this puzzle unsolved. He approached one of the staff members, an older man with a gruff demeanor who had been serving drinks all evening. "Do you know who she is?" Marcus asked, his voice low but insistent. The staff member hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously toward the lower deck before he spoke. "She's a guest. Just don't go asking too many questions," he said, the warning clear in his tone. Marcus's curiosity only deepened, and as the minutes ticked by, he found himself growing more restless. He couldn't understand it. Why did everyone seem to treat her with such reverence? What was it about this quiet, unassuming woman that had the crew so protective? Meanwhile, the woman remained a mystery to everyone. She had barely spoken to anyone all night, but her presence was starting to loom larger than anyone had anticipated. Her silence spoke volumes, and as the night carried on, the tension grew. But in the shadows, someone else was watching too. Someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to make their move. What were they planning? And how was the woman connected to it all? As the night grew darker, the atmosphere on deck became charged with an undercurrent of tension. The guests, once carefree and full of laughter, were now watching her every move. They whispered among themselves, trying to piece together the mystery. Had they misjudged her? The nagging feeling that they were missing something was impossible to shake. Marcus, growing more obsessed by the second, couldn't stand the uncertainty. He had spent the evening trying to figure out who she was, but all his attempts to engage her had failed. Every time he approached, she either quietly excused herself or simply smiled and returned to her quiet spot by the railing. It was almost as if she was purposely avoiding him, deliberately withholding something important. And then, just when he was about to approach her once more, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. A flash of light from the lower deck, a light that shouldn't have been on at this hour. It was too early for anyone to be using the ship's control room. He felt a sudden chill run through him, a gut instinct telling him something wasn't right. He motioned to a friend, a fellow entrepreneur named Clara, and gestured toward the lower deck. She raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. Together, they quietly slipped away from the party, careful not to draw attention. As they descended the stairs, the dim lights of the yacht cast long shadows, amplifying their unease. The door to the control room creaked open, revealing the woman standing at the helm, her hands resting confidently on the wheel. But it wasn't just her calm demeanor that struck them, it was the look in her eyes. Cold, calculated, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind them echoed through the corridor. Someone else had noticed their disappearance, and that someone wasn't about to let them uncover the truth. Just as Clara and Marcus exchanged confused glances, trying to make sense of what they were seeing, the sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. The door slammed shut with a force that made them both jump. They spun around, eyes wide, only to be met by a figure emerging from the shadows. It was one of the crew members, the same one who had served them drinks earlier in the evening. But this time, his face was different, his usual composed expression replaced with something far darker. His eyes darted between them and the door to the control room, his lips tightening. "You shouldn't be down here," he warned, his voice low but urgent. Clara felt her pulse quicken. This was no ordinary crew member. There was something about him that didn't sit right. Before Marcus could respond, the man stepped closer, blocking their path. "You're asking too many questions," he continued, his tone growing more menacing. "It's better if you leave things alone." Marcus tried to push past him, but the man was faster, grabbing his arm with a vice-like grip. Clara's heart raced. She could feel the shift in the air. Something was about to happen, something they weren't prepared for. The woman at the helm, still standing in the control room, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but chilling. "Let them through." The crew member hesitated, his expression one of disbelief. But there was something in her tone that left no room for argument. Slowly, he released Marcus and stepped aside, his eyes flicking nervously between them and the woman. Clara and Marcus exchanged another glance, this one full of confusion and fear. The woman smiled faintly as they entered the control room, the door clicking shut behind them. But just as they stepped forward, a loud bang echoed through the yacht. The lights flickered once, and then went out. Silence. Complete, unnerving silence. Something had shifted, and now the stakes were higher than ever. The sudden darkness sent a jolt of panic through Clara and Marcus. They stood frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The only sound was the muffled hum of the yacht's engine below deck, but even that seemed to fade into an eerie quiet. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she reached out for Marcus's arm, her fingers brushing against it in the blackness. Then, a soft click, followed by the flicker of emergency lights. The control room bathed in a dim, ghostly glow. The woman at the helm stood unmoving, her posture still as a statue. She didn't speak for a moment, and in the tense silence, Clara and Marcus felt like intruders in a world they couldn't comprehend. The woman finally turned, her eyes cold and calculating. "You're not supposed to be here," she said simply, her voice no longer calm but sharp, like a predator revealing its true nature. Marcus stepped forward, heart pounding. "What is this? Who are you really?" The woman smirked, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was something more sinister. "You think you figured it out, don't you? That I'm just some quiet guest with a secret." She leaned closer to the wheel, her hands poised delicately, but with a deadly purpose. "But you've got it all wrong. This yacht, it's not mine." Clara's stomach dropped. "Then whose is it?" The woman's smile twisted into something darker. "It's yours." The realization hit them both like a punch to the gut. The yacht had been hijacked, by them, by the crew, by the woman who had played them all along. The crew member they had trusted wasn't just protecting her, he was part of the plan. And the woman wasn't an outsider at all, she was the mastermind. Before Clara or Marcus could react, the yacht jolted violently, sending them crashing against the walls. The woman laughed, her voice echoing throughout the control room as everything around them descended into chaos. The final twist? It wasn't just a luxury yacht. They had been sailing straight into international waters. And the woman, she was no guest at all. She was the captain. The yacht rocked violently again, this time harder than before, throwing Clara and Marcus off balance. Their hearts raced, the full weight of the situation crushing down on them. The woman at the helm, no longer the mysterious guest, but now the undeniable captain, was in complete control. Clara struggled to regain her footing, her mind spinning. How have they been so blind? Why? Marcus finally managed, his voice hoarse. "Why take us? What do you want from us?" The woman's gaze softened just a fraction, but the coldness in her eyes remained. "It was never about you two," she said. "It was always about the yacht. The moment you stepped onto this vessel, you became part of a much bigger game." She paused, glancing briefly at the crew member, who was now working alongside her, turning the ship's controls with practiced ease. "This yacht and everything on it is worth more than you can imagine. But the real question is, who would believe a story like this?" Clara and Marcus exchanged a look, the realization dawning on them. The woman wasn't interested in them personally. She had simply used them as pawns, as part of a carefully orchestrated plan. They were nothing more than distractions to keep the other guests occupied while she worked her true scheme. Before they could respond, the woman's voice dropped into a dangerous whisper. "I'm not interested in answers. Only in control." As the yacht surged forward into the open sea, the two of them stood there, caught in a nightmare they could neither escape nor comprehend. The crew member approached, nodding respectfully to the woman. Without another word, they turned back to their duties, leaving Marcus and Clara standing in stunned silence. The storm had only just begun, and their world, along with the guests on board, was about to unravel in ways none of them could have ever predicted.